Hello.
Hi.
My name, I'm going to have to stand here. This is not going to be good. Okay. I like to walk around.
Mandy, there's the mic.
Oh, yeah, even better.
Green one is on.
Thanks. Hello. Much better. This is better. I'm not very good at standing behind the thing. So my name is Mandy Michael. I'm a front-end developer. I work at 7 West Media. So we build like the West Australian and Perth Now. And everything I'm going to show you today is on CodePen. It's public, so you can go and have a look if anything interests you. I'm Mandy Michael on CodePen, and I will tweet out about it later. I'm Mandy_Kerr on Twitter, so if you want to tweet at me about stuff later, you can. I'm always on Twitter, which actually leads me into my talk today, which is called CSS is Awesome. And the reason that I want to talk about this is because the other night, so I do this thing where it's late at night and I can't sleep, so I go on Twitter and I have a bit of a rant about something. And in this case, it was about this meme, which is often used as a way to say why CSS sucks. I think that's wrong. I think this is awesome. I think CSS is doing exactly what it should do in this scenario. And the reason that I think that is because here what we're doing is giving a very explicit width and height. We're setting a very specific font size, and then we're putting text in it and just expecting that the container and the text is going to work, which is stupid. We've used these magic numbers, we've put content in it, and then it overflows. So CSS has just gone, well, dude, that's not going to work. I'll just overflow it out of the container. You can still read the content. You can figure out what you're going to do about it later, or you can leave it as it is. So I went on a bit of a ramble about why this is great and a whole bunch of different things you could do, the opportunities that CSS provide you in order to deal with this or treat it differently. So what I'm going to do today is tell you about ways that you can deal with this problem, but also ways that you can use CSS to present it in a way that best conveys the meaning of your text. In this case, CSS is awesome. And the very specific reason why I'm doing this is that I was asked to talk about all the cool things in CSS, and I went, whew, how long have you got? Because there's heaps of cool things. So I've picked some. I've picked some of my favorites, some new, some old, and hopefully you'll learn something today. So this is really boring and really obvious. You could solve this problem by setting the container, which is the, oh, there's my thing, the box, to overflow hidden. Really simple, problem solved, doesn't overflow. I think this is shitty, mainly because you can't read the word. This is way better. Again, CSS, awesome. But another option that you can do is use the overflow property with the value of hidden on the H1, and you can add a text overflow of ellipsis. This is okay in some scenarios, like if you've got a summary or something like that and you're linking off to get more information. But in this particular case, I think it's a really bad implementation because this is really prominent text, and that all could literally say anything. You could say awkward, could say CSS is awful, could say CSS is, what's another or word?
Or inspiring. Away.
Away? CSS is away. I like that one. That's a good one. I would never thought of that. So you've got to pick the right context for the content that you're trying to display. The other reason why I really, really hate this example is because of stuff like this. I bet you can't guess what this word is.
Poodles.
Oh, poodles! You got it! Yeah, poodles. I do love poodles. I don't have a poodle. I have a golden retriever, but my life is about picking up dog poo at the moment. But that's why I think this is really bad, because this can happen a lot. You can kind of see how you can get yourself into a bit of an awkward situation with words when you start chopping it off, concatenating it, not concatenating, truncating it. So you've got to be really careful with the things that you choose in this case. Now another thing that you probably didn't notice, but I noticed immediately when I did this, is that the text doesn't fit perfectly in the box vertically anymore because it's not on 3 lines. And one of the things that CSS gets a lot of grief over is not being able to vertically center. But there's actually a lot of ways you can vertically center in CSS. You can use transforms, you can use positioning. Way back in the day, you could use tables. But the best way to vertically center in CSS now is with Flexbox. And it's really, really easy. It's literally these two lines of CSS on the box. So we set a display of flex and align items property with a value of center. And that's it. Problem solved. Not a problem anymore. CSS is awesome. But there is a couple of things you should know, and this is what I think the most important thing about Flexbox to understand is, it has a cross-axis and a main axis, and this depends on the direction that you apply to the flex item. So in this case, and by default, Flexbox adds a flex direction of row, which means everything goes horizontally. So it's got a horizontal main axis and a vertical cross-axis. Now, because I want to align vertically here, I have to use the align group of properties. And that's because align is associated with the cross-axis. If I change this to a flex direction of column, it switches the cross-axis and the main axis. So the main axis is now the vertical axis. And this means that if I want to vertically center, I have to use the justify group of properties. So justify items to center. If you can wrap your head around this, Flexbox is really easy, because that's the thing that a lot of people get hung up on, that do I use align or do I use justify? Which one is which? And they couldn't do it, justify is always horizontal because you're changing the meaning by changing the direction from a row to a column. But Flexbox gives us a lot of ways to vertically center or to align content within the div. You can use space between, which evenly distributes space in the middle of items. There's also a property called space around, which puts an even amount of space around each item. My favorite is flex end, which puts everything at the end. It's really straightforward, really easy, and you have a lot of control how you want to align your content in CSS. And Flexbox works really awesome with CSS Grid, which is new, and it is supported in all the major browsers now. Not in IE, but it's fine. There are a lot of really good resources for doing fallbacks for Grid. Rachel Andrew, Jen Simmons, Una Kravitz, they've all got awesome things. It's not hard. I've done it, it's really easy. Now, I can't go through everything with Grid because that would be like an hour of awesome and I wouldn't want to overload you. But what I will do is just give you a really simple example of how powerful CSS is and how powerful the Grid spec is. Now, if you look at this example, I've got here 8 boxes that say CSS is awesome, because I want everyone to know how awesome CSS is. And around that is a container. And on that container, I add display grid. And that's going to say, use the grid spec. Now, because I want to have spacing between each one, I've got a grid gap of 20 pixels. And then what I need to do is tell it how I want the content to be distributed. So first up is setting up the columns, which I've got 4 of. I use a property called grid template columns. And on this, I'm going to use the repeat function. The reason I'm doing this is partly because I'm lazy, but also because it just works, because I've got an unknown amount of CSS is awesome, because you can never have too many. And the way that this works with autofill is it says, I want to fit as many of these items along my track as long as the size is a minimum of 280 pixels and a maximum of 1 fraction. And what 1 fraction essentially means is, so fraction units basically mean 1 fraction of the available space. So I'm going to show you what this looks like because it's easier to show, but basically what this is doing is as it scales, it says, well, I can fit 3 or 4 or 1 box at a minimum size of 280 pixels. And then it uses the fraction unit to just scale that out. And what I love about this is that that's done with these 4 lines of CSS. There's no media queries. It just works. There's not very complicated HTML. It's a container with all the divs inside of it. And if you were to recreate this with floats or even Flexbox, you'll be finding you're writing a lot of CSS with a lot of media queries and a lot of HTML to try and get something like this to work. So Grid actually makes our code simpler, which means if you're building large JavaScript web apps like I'm doing at the moment, your bundle size is huge because you've got all this CSS and all this HTML in order to create a layout like this. So CSS Grid is really awesome and really powerful, and it lets us do a lot of things. In particular, what CSS Grid allows us to do is start making sort of magazine type layouts. And another thing that you see in magazine type layouts is text wrapping around images or around containers. And this is something that you can do in CSS in Chrome, just Chrome at the moment. It is coming in Firefox in August, apparently, so that's pretty cool. And it's called CSS Shapes. And the way CSS Shapes work is it lets you define a shape in CSS with either a polygon or a circle, something like that, and then the text wraps around it. So here, if right at the bottom there's a property called shape-outside. And what that means is, on my shape inside my container, I'm going to put some CSS in there and define the shape that I want the text to wrap around. So I picked a triangle, because, I don't know, no reason in particular, I just thought it was cool. And the way that you define this with Polygon is you set up the coordinates. And this essentially, I'm going to come over here. I feel like I'm not giving you guys any love. So over here, we've got 3 coordinates for each point of the triangle. 0, 0 is the top left, 0, 100 is the bottom left, and then 50, 50 is the point in here. And you can create any shape that you want with a polygon. You can put 30 points, 100 points, whatever you want. And that'll just mean that the text wraps around. What's really important about this though is the float. Yep, you still use floats in CSS. I know people think you don't need to learn about them anymore, but they're wrong. Floats are still really awesome. Finally, we're going to use floats for what they're meant for, floating things. So do figure out how floats work. Don't ignore it. They're really important. And you can float it left or you can float it right, because that's what floats do. Just quickly though, importantly to note, the syntax does vary for the shape depending on what kind of thing you want to do. So if you wanted a circle, rather than putting like 1,000 points to get a really nice circle, you can use the circle syntax. You just define a radius and again a coordinate of where you want it to sit. So in this case, 50%, and that is my radius, and then the circle just goes around here. I'm going to come over here and show you too. Over here. So I've given it a radius of 50% of the container and then positioned it at 50%, so it sits like that. So this syntax is the same for clip path, which is another property, but I'm not going to talk about that because I had to cut it, I'm afraid. I talk too much. Now, one of the most obvious things that I didn't talk about right at the very beginning was that you could just remove the width and height from the box and everything would just work. Sometimes removing things is actually the way to go, but there's still a problem with this, and that's because I've still got that darn fixed font size, which I think is 45 pixels from memory. And you can see when it gets smaller, the text gets cut off again, which I'm really not a fan of. So the next thing I want to talk about is viewport units. And they're actually pretty well supported. All the new browsers support it. And back to IE9, partial support. So what I'm going to apply to this, and I'm going to show you how it works before I explain what they are. I'm using a viewport width unit, and it'll just scale perfectly with the viewport, just like that, really, really smoothly. And Yeah, there we go. And the way that our viewport units work is essentially they're a percentage of the viewport. So there's a viewport width, and that's 1% of the viewport width. There's a viewport height, 1% of the viewport height. And then there's Vmin and Vmax. Vmin is essentially, it'll take either the viewport width or the viewport height, whichever is smaller. And then Vmax will take viewport width, viewport height, whichever is larger. And they're really awesome for controlling the way that you want your text or widths or anything to scale according to the viewport. What's really great about these is people like Mike Reifmuller have created fairly complex calc SAS functions to create fluid typography on the web. That'll just scale and work in every browser with minimum and maximum values. They're really, really awesome, and I use them all the time, especially in CodePen where I'm being lazy and want to make a responsive like text effect and don't want to write media queries. So they're pretty great. I really like these. I highly recommend you use them. Again, like I said, really good support. I would be very sad if I talked about fonts and didn't talk about variable fonts, because they're like my favorite thing. If you follow me on Twitter, this was another one of my Twitter rants recently, which actually went really well. I got spammed on my Twitter about this rant. But a variable font is, it's a little bit of a stretch. It is CSS, but it's mainly about the font, because what a variable font does, and this is a new spec, it's supported in Chrome, Safari, and just today, Edge, which is awesome. Firefox is like tweeting, going, yeah, we'll have it soon. So it's, pretty cool. Anyway, a variable font is essentially one font that acts like multiple fonts. So where you have a bold and an italic and a condensed font as multiple individual files, a variable font is one file that contains all of that information. And what's really awesome about this, there's so many things. Firstly, performance is much better because we're not blocking the rendering of our page by loading multiple fonts. We only need one. Easy. The other thing is typically these fonts are smaller than the individual fonts combined. So that's better for performance as well. And the third thing that I love about it is variable fonts have built-in interpolation. So if you have a thin weight, like what I've used for CSS, and a thick weight, like I've used for awesome, you can actually animate this. So you can go from thin to thick without having janky fonts switching out or anything like that. Because the font, from start to finish, will interpolate all of those values, which also means that while now we're restricted to 400 weight and like a thin and a bold, we can have anything along that axis of interpolation, which I think is really cool. And I will show you why that's cool in a minute. But first of all, I'm going to tell you how it works with CSS. So the first thing, I'm going to come over this side. You just set up your font. So on the H1, this one's called Dunbar. And then you use this font variation settings property. And what you do in this is you set you have to reference the named axis. So because it can have multiple styles in it, this is using weight, which is predefined. And this one here is X height, which actually refers to the height of these letters. So if you see the S is actually a different height in all of these words. And all you have to do is pick a value along the range. So the H1 is actually awesome. Yeah, that's cool. Which is 178 weight. There is this one here, which is 89. 89 weight with like really random decimal places, which I actually put in so you could see that you can literally pick any value along the axis, and it will let you do that. And then the weight in this one is 50 as a weight. And then I did the same with the X height. That's all one font, just targeting with CSS. So it's really cool. This is probably my most popular thing that I've ever made in my life. It's my contribution to the web, and it's growing grass text, which I made with a variable font called Decover, and blew some people's minds because no one has ever animated text like that before. So with actual text, and that's editable. You can change that to whatever text you want it to be, and it'll still work, which is pretty cool. And I actually cheated with this and combined things in a way I wasn't supposed to make the leaves, but it's pretty cool what you can do. You can create a whole new effects with variable fonts. So moving swiftly on, because I could literally talk about variable fonts all day. They're so cool. I want to talk about other text-related things, because I make a lot of text effects on CodePen, and I want to talk about first letter, because I don't think it's used enough. It's something you see in print a lot, and people don't use it enough on the web, for my liking. It's really, really simple. I target my H1 with a pseudo element called first letter, using the double colon, and then I just put whatever stars I want in there. So I have cheated a little bit with this CSS. The really basic version of this is I've set a font size, a font family called Farter, a font weight, because I don't want it to be super bold, and a color. Now, obviously that's not how you get this beautiful layered 3D text. I did cheat a bit. This has two pseudo elements on it as well, which I've used to layer the same font, because it's a special font, it's a layered font, and then I've just changed the colors of it, which is another thing that you can do with variable fonts. If you want to see how this is made, I literally have about 100 using this example on my CodePen. Now, from a more practical sense, something like text decoration skip is really awesome. So you may not have noticed, but when you use a standard underline on the web, the underline goes straight through the descender, which is this little bit on the P. Text decoration skip with a value of ink will skip that and put this nice like space in between. Now this is great because firstly it looks nice, but as my friend Julie pointed out in her presentation recently, it's really good for accessibility. People with dyslexia might have trouble reading text if you've got lines through it, so it's a really good accessibility feature as well as a nice sort of visual tweak to your designs and to your page. The other thing I've added on here is you can actually color the underline. It doesn't have to be blue or whatever color you set your link to. I've used text decoration color, and I've picked my favorite named color, Rebecca Purple. Purple is my favorite color. But the other thing that you can do is you can actually put overlines on your text as well, and you can have an overline and an underline, and you do this by just specifying the property text decoration line, and you just go overline space underline, and if you want to you can have line through as well, and it'll put a line through the middle like a strike through. I really like this. I don't know why you don't see it often. Of course you could go a bit nuts like I did. Thought this was really fun. I really enjoyed making this one. You can style the way the line looks. This one uses a value called wavy, which is really fun. There's also dotted and double and solid, which is boring. And this one, like I said before, is using line through, so it can go through the middle. The only thing I would say about wavy is I actually put it like underline first, because it's so deep. I had to adjust the line height of this when it was underneath so that it would actually fit. So considerations to be made. Lots of opportunity, lots of problems that come along with it. What's my time like? Oh yeah, cool. So another thing that I love to do in CSS, and this is kind of more of a visual thing, but I think it's really important for conveying information, is and conveying context, is using shadows. And there are two types of shadows in CSS. There's the box shadow and there's the text shadow, and I'm using both of them in this. I make this stuff all the time. It's really fun. A lot of the time when I show people some of the shadow stuff that I've done, they look at it and they're like, whoa, what's going on? It's actually not very complicated. If we look at the box shadow first, on the div I've got a 1 pixel key line around the box, and then this sort of offsetty 3D looking shadow. And all this is doing is setting for the key line. I don't want it to be offset, so I'm not setting an X and Y coordinate. I don't want it to be blurred, which is what this third value is, but I want a spread, which is how far it goes from the center of 1 pixel, and then a color using a hex value or RGB or whatever you want to use. And that just gives me this outline here. The second one gives me this bit, and you can keep adding like I've done in text shadow as much as you want. This one, because I want to offset it, I'm going 8 pixels to the left and 8 pixels to the left and 8 pixels down. I'm not blurring it because that's not fun. And yeah, no spread, because I want it to be exactly the size of the container. And the same approach applies on a text shadow. Exactly the same syntax. I've got a key line around the text, so I've got my 1 pixel. It's a little bit different with text because text shadows are meant to be like a drop shadow, so it's like one angle. So you get around this with a text shadow by actually putting in 4 text shadows for the key line, and you offset it bottom left, bottom right, top left, top right, and then it makes a line. And then this second part creates the 3D bit there. And all you do is increment the value until you reach the desired distance away from the text that you want it to be. It's not very hard, it's just very time consuming. I wrote this by hand. You don't have to do that. You can use Sass functions if you write Sass or less or stylus or whatever your thing of choice is. But what I love about shadows is that you can do stuff like this. And to me, this makes CSS look really awesome because that looks pretty sweet. I challenge anyone to tell me that it's not. It's wicked. And you do this by putting a lot of text shadows with a blur and changing the alpha channel of the RGBA value. And you just offset it and offset it and offset it until you reach, what have I got there? 21, 39, 21 pixels down here, and it just fades off. This is like my favorite shadow effect in CSS. It takes forever to write. So I'm just going to finish up with an animation. I had heaps, but I took them out because some of them were a bit obnoxious, and I realized that was probably not a good demonstration of CSS. But I am putting this up because if anyone doesn't like flashy things, you're not going to like this. So I recommend looking away. I will tell you when it's gone. I'm going to change the slide now. Hang on. My video didn't play. There we go. Worst. You missed the effect, everyone. Anyway. Disco, it's my disco animation. I'll come back to it, maybe it'll load. And the way that we do this is with keyframe animations. And essentially this is done using the keyframe syntax. So it uses this at keyframes, has to be keyframes with an S. Sometimes I forget to put that in and it doesn't work. And you give it a name, so I called it disco because that seemed appropriate. And then you can set up your keyframe, and it can be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 100 if you want it to, or you can do it at, in this case, I've done 20% intervals. And then you can literally change any CS property that you want. I did background, and then I picked random colors. Didn't put that much effort into picking the colors. I think it turned out pretty sweet. And then on the div, so in this case the container that's around the CSS is awesome, you can add the animation and apply it to that container. So first up, you set the name, which is disco. Then you can put your timing function in, which is 1,000 milliseconds. I've also added an iteration count of infinite because the party should literally never end. And then you can add an animation direction, which in this case, I've done alternate. And what that means is it'll go like this. Otherwise, you've got forwards, which always just goes forward. That looks a bit janky. I don't like that. There's a bunch of options. There is a shorthand version of this syntax, but I separated them out so you could actually see what they were doing. And then for the background, I did exactly the same thing, but I swapped the colors around so that it would look different. Let's see if this plays again. That's so sad. It's my favorite slide. Anyway, we'll move on. But the power of animations on the web is really, really awesome. You can do really obnoxious things like this. You can shake your text, you can zoom stuff in and out, or you can animate in things. You can create a storytelling experience, and you can help convey your content in a way that's actually meaningful. Now, another thing that you can do is blend modes. There's two blend modes. There's background blend mode and mixed blend mode. The background blend mode works by having a background color and a background image, and it blends the two together. Mixed blend mode works by blending elements that are stacked on top of each other. So the background here is got a blend mode on this space image, and then the H1 has the mixed blend mode, and that blends into the background of both the container and the text and the background. And the way this works, hope this one plays. So you can see here, as I change the color, the image changes. And this might seem a little bit frivolous, but actually it's really good if you want to keep your image file sizes down, like grayscale, and apply like a tint over the top. You can do that. You can create interesting hover effects with something like this. And they're really, there's a lot of practical uses for it aside from the pretty ones. And what's great about this is if you're familiar with Photoshop, it's all the same values: darken, lighten, screen, color dodge, exclusion. If you don't know what they are, Mozilla developer docs actually explain them all really, really well. Did I go through? Yeah, I did. Cool. So I actually combined the blend modes and the animations to make this totally amazing video, which I'm really sad might not actually play for you. That's sad. You can go check that out on CodePen. I might tweet that one later. Essentially, it's using mixed blend mode and screen. So as it overlays, why is that not loading? I'm really sad. It's my favorite. As it overlays, it sort of masks out bits of the text and creates new colors. It's really cool. So I am going to finish up now. What I hope that you at least got out of today, if you didn't learn anything new, that's fine. If you still think CSS sucks, that's less fine, but okay. What I do hope that you get out of this, though, is that when you see this meme, you stop thinking about just that one outcome of CSS and how it does that, and you start thinking about all the opportunity that can be applied to it. So, you know, I showed you a bunch of things, a bunch of ways that you can use CSS to change the way content looks and acts and responds, both practically and for fun. But I didn't really talk about all the other things that are in CSS. And there's literally so many awesome things. You can mask things, you can skew things, you can rotate them. We've got attribute functions and calc functions and selectors that allow you to be specific about something that you want in the page. There's will change, which lets you tell the browser that something's going to change for better performance. We've got custom properties now in CSS, which are kind of like variables in a very loose sense. So there's really a lot that you can do, and you should definitely go and give it a whirl, try it out. But if I definitely haven't convinced you that CSS is awesome, I actually want to show you this, which I got sent today. This is made with CSS. It's all HTML and CSS. I don't know how it's made. I got sent it today and went, whoa, I don't know CSS. Holy cow. If you look at this, there's like veins and like a freckle and eyelashes There's eyelashes on this. It's freaking amazing. And if you can't look at this and think CSS is awesome, I can't help you. You're on your own. So that's it. Thank you very much.